the biggest and I suppose the meatiest topic around referees at the moment is respecting the referee. And this has all come about, just for those of you who haven't caught up on the story, it's to do with Mack Hansen, the Ireland winger and Connacht winger, who has now been banned for 6 weeks, 3 of which are suspended, for criticising the officiating of Connacht against Leinster in the URC. I'm going to read the quotes that got Hansen into hot water. He said, "I feel like we get this every week. We being Connacht. We never get any calls ever. I've been feeling this for years now. You can't possibly tell me yourself sitting there, like checking the Gus McCarthy one. How much, ? How much did they check that? 10, 11 times? Bundy gets a direct hit to the head. It's quite obvious. No call, doesn't care. It's like we get that every time. So you can hear the frustration in my voice because it's starting to get to the point where, honestly, it's bullshit and it's starting to get really frustrating." He goes on and on and on. This was a post-match interview off the back of Connacht having lost to Leinster, and Mack Hansen's point was that Connacht do not get the rub of the green, and Leinster, being the blue-eyed boys in every sense, get every call that benefits them. He finishes by saying, "I feel it's got to be spoken about because it's just getting to the point where it's starting to really piss us off because we're feeling we're getting played out of games and we never get any calls." What happened off the back of that is obviously the authorities stepped in. Hansen then made a full apology. He now has to undertake an appropriate course related to match officiating with the learnings to be disseminated with his teammates, while Connacht must run an education session. I don't know why you're laughing. Education session with their players about how to conduct themselves in post-match media sessions and interactions with the media. Hansen is back in time for the England game, and that's prompted our friend Joe Marler to pile in and describe the ban as complete bollocks on X. The real sadness in all of this is that the referee, who was Chris Busby, 38 years of old, is now retiring. I don't think it's specifically because of the incident, but by all accounts, the incident has played into a decision where he's just said, "I've had enough of it." He was meant to be refereeing Bath against Claremont. He was replaced in that one by Mike Adamson. It's not the first time. I fear it won't be the last time, but it is the latest episode of players boiling over and the consequences sort of, being far and wide. Give us your snapshot. I suppose why are you laughing, first of all? Because it feels like an incident in the back of class to you.
Okay, so my perspective, look, I'd love to hear your opinion on this now. And obviously, for example, Wayne Barnes is a mate of mine. I understand when he was attacked online on social media, right? People crossed the boundaries to
death threats against his family, his kids.
To awful, right? And I think personal attacks on people show a lack of intelligence because you can argue about issues. It should never be about people. And I think having an opinion, for example, on the referee and being able to share that, I don't have an issue with that. I think for me, with players, we are scrutinised on social media, we're scrutinised in the media, and we're scrutinised in analysis sessions for the game. So if we made mistakes, we're accountable. Now, in my career, often referees can make mistakes that can lead to games being lost. My thing would always be, as long as they're held accountable, but it can't be, if I make a mistake, we lose a game, everybody knows about it. If a referee makes a mistake and they lose a game and they go off into the ether and there's no accountability, or there's no kind of scrutiny, or there's no way of kind of almost reversing potentially that decision, that can sometimes be quite challenging. So you can see why players would want to vocalise it. I think turning around and saying, I have concerns over the quality of the referee on that day, I feel like we aren't getting those decisions, I feel like this isn't the case, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think he's personally attacked the referee. I think that doing these courses is just, it's such a silly, it's like asking me to go and speak to HR. Like, I've refused to do it. I don't want to talk to it. I don't want to hear about your touchy-feely nonsense. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to learn. I'm not interested. It's the same way as Mack Hansen. That's just a waste of time exercise.
We've discussed this before, Luke. I'd be very interested in your view on this. Instead of sitting down and I just get them out to the local community.
Yeah, I'd get him to referee a couple of local games. Yeah. I'd send Mack out and go, listen, we're going to take you on a course to do something, to show you what we have to go through. You referee a few local games. Now, I think the problem now with referees, they've been thrust into the spotlight and they are now being attacked. And I would never wish that upon anyone, because I get regularly attacked on social media. I'm regularly insulted and threatened and everything else. The fact that, I've sort of become slightly immune to it. I would never wish that on anyone, but I do think you should be held accountable in a professional sport for the decisions you make, and I think that you should be able to talk about it. As a captain, I would never go in a press conference and blame the referee, because, to be honest with you, if you're blaming the referee for loss of a game, unless it's catastrophic malpractice, it really, you should be looking at how your team's playing and the mistakes and whether you're putting yourselves in those positions would be my first thought. If a referee has cost you through a mistake, I think you should be able to vocalise that. I think, unfortunately, people like Rassie Erasmus sort of push that sort of too far, and I think the game is overly complicated at the moment. I think if we could help referees help themselves and still make them accountable, I don't think it's a problem to have a discussion about it. So, and I was just laughing at kind of the stupidity
You're
of the kind
at
of
the detention
as an adult being sort of taken into courses and like how to speak to. It's like, come on,
right, Luke, give us your view of a fairly unsavoury incident for the game of rugby right here, right now.
I would split into two, lads. And I don't want to sit on the fence. I'm very clear in my views on this. Hask, I think you make a very valid point. Accountability is huge. We as referees, and I speak on behalf of them a bit unfairly perhaps, because we're not meeting for the Six Nations till the end of this month. So maybe what I'm saying won't be in agreement, but we've got to be held accountable. And I think we are. People just aren't aware of the levels of accountability. So I think that's point one. We can do way more work in communicating with the wider world about decisions. Now, that's not necessarily maybe doing what football do in every Monday, going on referee watch and here's what we got right, here's what we've wrong, but we can educate people on laws. For example, Ben on the weekend. That's why a law is doing right. If we give a card that's deemed wrong in a review, is there much harm in coming out and saying, yeah, we've looked at it as a group, we don't think that's the right decision? Maybe that's somewhere we need to get to. The only thing I would add, and I love the idea of free speech. I love the idea of people being able to voice their concerns and opinions. In general, I think it's not a bad thing. However, people in senior position have consequences of their actions, and consequences not necessarily in the petty kind of courses or whatever you want to call it, but consequences in terms of once a player or a coach speaks out in public criticizing a ref, which they can, if they want to do that. The impact that has, it basically takes the button off for the public, and the public then pile in. So it opens up a can of worms to everyone else. So you end up generating way more attention, way more of these messages on social media, which if you want to be on social media, unfortunately, you're open to it. So that's an option as well. But that's just the consequential thing. And that I don't think this is the wholehearted reason that Chris has walked away and finished refereeing. But it's part of it. And I think it's just making sure that people, players, coaches are aware that we have decent structures in place in getting feedback to us and feedback to coaches. It works pretty well internationally. We've had a couple of blips, like you mentioned, Has. But there's so many conversations that happen behind the scenes, making sure that teams, if they feel aggrieved, can voice it. Players can voice it just in the right way. That's all. And it's just hopeful that we're all trying to get to the same stage together. Maybe that emotional control that we spoke about, the first thing, is so important. And we don't get that right of return, do we? Chris didn't have the chance to voice his concerns or right to reply to the comments that were made. And it's just one of those things that maybe isn't helping our sport move forward. Let's spin it around. Let's use it. How can we actually make this better? Well, we can make it better by sometimes putting us out there and explaining the decision, putting us out there and maybe communicating why we give things right or wrong. But this isn't a court where we're held a gun to our head and, you're going to be gone, finished. Players don't have a good game sometimes and they're picked again next week. Where is our levels of acceptable accountability? Do people want to see referees finishing and retiring? Do they want to see them dropped? Do they want to see them, what is the end outcome? And it's just a shame that we've lost a very promising international ref. Not solely, and I go back to that point, not solely like the press have been reporting on this matter. People don't often see, we touched on it earlier on, in South Africa, for example, not knowing where you're going. The stresses and the pressure that happens off field in this job, they're immense now. People may not believe it when they see us on a golf course on Instagram, but the pressures, that you don't know where you're going to be going the following week. You're making sure your kids are okay at home. You might be copying it in the press. No longer the paper's the biggest thing. It's social media, isn't it? And as long as people have an understanding of that, we're not trying to be fully protected. We're not trying to make this job, oh, well, we can do what we want. Doesn't matter. We move on to next week. We want to be, and we are held accountable. We just need support sometimes from people in higher positions or with higher voices or louder voices, should I say, to try and just calm the storm rather than pour petrol onto it sometimes. But it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because people want to hear people's opinions. I love watching Roy Keane on the telly, on the football, because he gives his honest opinion. That's why I watch it. And it's a balance act here of making sure that we're protecting people, but we're also not hiding behind things either. And I'm not quite sure where that lies at the moment.
Firstly, look, I think it's a brilliant answer and very articulately put. I think really, I agree with everything you're saying. I would say what I would love to see that I think would really help people is the understanding of what the sort of the accountability is, and the ability for you guys to speak and address things. It's not become a free for all, but understanding what that structure looks like, whether it's part of the press conference. I'm putting things out my arse here, but like thinking out loud, whether it's part of the press conference where you're asked, maybe able to be asked questions, maybe the rulings are filed, maybe you do come out and say, actually, we got this wrong, and this is what we're going to work on, and this is what we believe, and it puts it to bed. Unfortunately, you're never going to escape social media and the morons that inhabit it, and the attacks, and people like Roy Keane, as you said, I think can come out with an opinion. I, as a player, I would have loved to come out and say, listen, I don't think so-and-so was particularly good today. I think my team didn't do well. We gave a few penalties away. I'd question a couple of the referees' decisions. I felt that I wasn't able to have a rapport with him, or he shut me down. That's an opinion. It's not a personal attack, and everybody moves on. And then people would write about me going, well, James Haskell needs to stop worrying about the referee. James Haskell missed a tackle. And you all move on because there's a level of accountability. I think, unfortunately, people maybe don't feel, and I didn't feel previously, that referees could make a mistake and then sort of just go to bed, and there wasn't a facility to be able to speak about it. We saw it in the with Raz Erasmus in that period of time.
2021 Lions.
Yeah, Lions. I was covering it for TalkSport, and I wasn't sure what the recourse was. I didn't know that things were presented. I knew that you would come in pre-game and go, listen, we're focusing on the scrum, we're focusing people not releasing in the tackle, and these are things we're watching out for. The captains on the day would say, listen, we've got a line-out move that might look like it's not crossed the 5, but it has crossed the 5. And that was the kind of level of detail. But I know there's reports that go backwards and forwards, but it's more of a PR exercise, I feel, for you guys. And then that gives you the protection. But if people feel like there's a silence, they will fill the void of silence with criticism because they don't feel like justice is being served, in my mind.
And guys, we've got to get better at making sure that people are aware of what happens in post-match, and people are aware of the detail and the amount of work that we do. I'm not sat here trying to protect refs. We make mistakes, but that's the way it is. We're not perfect. Some mistakes will be bigger than others. We've got to be grown up and adult enough to come out and communicate maybe those in the right way. What I would say, and without sounding like a rugby bore perhaps, don't forget there are thousands of players and coaches and referees way below the professional levels, that if we take the lid off and we make certain things acceptable at our level, all that happens is that will trickle down. And we then get cases of where players and coaches are, the word respect is often voiced in rugby, isn't it? It's one of our great values, and sometimes we say it, but don't actually carry it through. I think one thing that we realize at the top end is that we get held accountable by the rest of the game below us. And it's one area we got to maintain it, because it's what sometimes creates the difference between our sport and others. And I feel sorry for those refs further down the chain who necessarily may not have that protection when coaches are having to go at them on the side of a pitch of a second team, or players are screaming at them in the middle of a Colts game. We got to try and maintain a certain standard somewhere. But it's just getting that right, isn't it?
But what does that actually mean? And I asked that question because we sat here in 2021 where poor old Nick Berry was hauled over the coals, and the whole Razzie Erasmus 42-minute debrief on his performance was raked up, and I think Nick was very open about the impact that had on him and his family. We sat here with Wayne Barnes 12 months ago when he retired from international rugby, having done a World Cup final, and he went through the vitriolic abuse that he and his family had received. We're now sitting here 12 months on with a promising referee, as you say, in Chris Busby. And I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's solely because of this, but he has got to the point where refereeing is no longer something he wants to carry on with. We're talking about openness and transparency, and we're talking about, rugby has a real problem with operating in smoky corners where things get decided without any kind of explanation to the people that follow the game. And we see that week in, week out in disciplinary hearings where people do extraordinary things and get off, and others get 6-month bans for things that most fans look at innocuous. I'm generalising, obviously. How do we get to a point where you as referees feel you have a platform and a dialogue and the ability to speak in the way that means people are able to understand the decisions you've made? Do you need your own proper I mean, do we need to be doing a lot of these debriefs in public, etc., or does that make it worse?
I think that makes it worse, in answer to your question directly. I do think there's room, and a lot of room, to bring something. And I don't know the answer, guys. Like, I'm not paid the big bucks to revolutionize this whole system, but there's certainly things we have to do to prove and show people that we are held accountable. That the amount of reviews, the amount of info that we get from teams, clubs post match, we answer them in a very measured way. And there are very thorough systems that are there already that people aren't aware of. So maybe point one here is communicating those better. During internationals, we have Nigel do the Whistle Watch series on the World Rugby. I think it's on the feeds or social media feeds, perhaps on YouTube, that explains decisions. And by the way, this is not us as referees sitting here saying, oh, we can't be shouted at, we can't be told we're wrong. If I make a mistake, if I made a mistake at Sharks, which I probably did, 2 or 3, Jack Willis's penalty, for example, in the Toulouse Sharks game is a wrong penalty. I've got to be big enough and ugly enough to say, yep, sorry, just misread. Looked at it for half a second and got it wrong. What we don't want is if we start doing that and we start communicating that we're kind of showing how human we are and how acceptable we are to be, to admit mistakes, we then get piled into more, which is probably not acceptable. So at some stage, we've got to find the right balance here, saying, and I don't think a press conference is the best place for players to be critical and using bad language. I don't want to be part of that game either. So there's a fine balance here, isn't there? Allowing people's opinions, allowing people's views, because it makes it entertaining. Let's be honest. That's it. Also adds to the entertainment factor, but also making sure that we're protected when we need to be protected, but we're also vulnerable and open to admitting when things didn't go quite as we saw it first time.